Claire Whitmore lifted her boot and shoved the engine block off the workbench. 400 pounds of iron hit the concrete like a church bell falling down a staircase. Dust jumped. A bolt rolled and stopped against Ethan Walker's steel toe. "That," she said, "is what your life's work is worth. Scrap metal." Ethan didn't yell. He knelt, picked up the bolt, and slid it into his shirt pocket like it was a wedding ring. "You just kicked over the only thing keeping your company alive," he said quietly. 11 months later, that same woman stood in that same garage and wrote him a check for $5 million and begged him to take it. Before we go on, comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if you believe a man's worth isn't measured by the size of his garage, subscribe. This one's for you. The phone rang at 6:12 in the morning, and Ethan Walker already knew who it was, because nobody with good news calls a man before the sun clears the ridge. He was flat on his back under a '98 Silverado with a wrench in his teeth. He rolled out, wiped his hands on a rag that hadn't been cleaned since March, and picked up. "Walker Automotive." "Mr. Walker, this is Dale Prentice over at Cumberland Savings." "Morning, Dale." "Ethan?" Dale sighed, and the sigh said more than the sentence that followed. "You're 41 days past on the shop note. I've been sitting on it. I can't sit on it much longer." "I know." "The Nashville office is running the file now. They don't know you. They don't know your daddy carried a mortgage here for 30 years without missing a payment. They see a number." "I understand." "Do you have anything coming?" Ethan looked out the open bay door at the gravel lot, at the 2 cars waiting on parts, at the rusted shipping container sitting under the oak tree like a tombstone somebody forgot to engrave. "I've got something coming," he said. "Is that a real something or a Tennessee something?" "It's real." "Ethan." "Dale. I've never lied to you. 12 days. Give me 12 days. There was a long pause, the kind where a man weighs a friendship against a spreadsheet. 12 days, Dale said. Then it's out of my hands. Ethan set the phone down and stood there a second with both palms flat on the counter, breathing. "Dad." Noah was in the doorway in his socks hair, sticking up a bowl of cereal in both hands like he was carrying a live grenade. "You're supposed to be getting dressed." "You're supposed to eat breakfast." "That's so. Mrs. Alvarez says a body's like an engine. You don't put fuel in it, it seizes." Noah held out the bowl. "So." Ethan looked at the bowl, then at the 10-year-old holding it, and something in his chest went tight and warm at the same time. "Give me that," he said. He ate standing up. Noah climbed onto the stool by the tool chest and swung his legs. "Was that the bank?" "That was a friend." "Dad?" "Eat your cereal." "I already ate mine. That's yours." Noah pointed the spoon at him. "You do this thing where you say a friend, and then you don't blink for like 8 seconds. Ethan laughed, a short, surprised bark of a laugh. "You counting my blinks now? Somebody's got to." Out in the lot, gravel crunched. A truck door slammed. Ray Dunlop came through the bay door with 2 coffees and the particular walk of a 61-year-old man whose knees had opinions about the weather. He'd been a fabricator for 34 years, 20 of them at a place he never named out loud anymore. "Morning, Noah." "Morning, Mr. Ray." "You get taller overnight." "Probably." Ray handed Ethan a coffee and looked at his face for exactly 1 second too long. "Prentice called," Ray said. It wasn't a question. "Noah, go get dressed. Bus is at 7:20. "I know when the bus is." "Then go." Noah went, but slow the way kids go when they know the real conversation starts the second they leave the room. Ray waited for the screen door. "How bad 12 days? "Jesus, Ethan." "It's fine." "It ain't fine. You want me to—" "Don't." Ethan said it gentle but flat. "You've got Marla's medicine. Don't you dare." Ray set his jaw and let it go, because that's what men like Ray do. They let it go, and then they lie awake about it. "You still going through with the container thing?" "Today. They're people called Monday, some liquidation manager. They want the lease terminated and the contents hauled to scrap by the end of the month. And you're gonna buy 'em. I'm gonna try. Ray looked out at the container under the oak. 8 years that thing's been sitting there. 8 years and 4 months. You ever open it? Ethan drank his coffee. Ethan, you ever open it? Twice, Ethan said. Both times I closed it again. The bus took Noah at 7:22 because Dwayne was always 2 minutes late and had been since 1994. Ethan finished the brake job on the Silverado, ate nothing for lunch, and at 1:40 in the afternoon, a black Range Rover came up the county road so fast it left a rooster tail of dust hanging over the mailboxes. It parked crooked across 2 spots that weren't spots. The woman who got out was maybe 36 in a coat that cost more than the Silverado, and she stood in the gravel, looking at the sign over the bay, Walker Automotive. Hand-painted one of the L's, fading with an expression like she'd taken a wrong exit into a foreign country. A man got out of the passenger side with a leather folio. Younger. Nervous. The kind of nervous that comes from working for somebody who fires people in elevators. Is this it? The woman said. This is the address, Ms. Whitmore. There's a chicken. Yes, ma'am. Ethan came out wiping his hands. Afternoon. Are you the owner? I am. Claire Whitmore. She didn't offer a hand. Whitmore Motors. You have property of ours on this lot. Container 6, yes, ma'am. It's been here a while. 8 years apparently at a lease rate of $200 a month that somebody in accounts payable has been paying without ever once asking why. She smiled without any warmth in it. I found it during an audit. I'm cleaning house. I heard. You heard? Small county. She glanced at the folio guy. Mr. Reyes will handle the paperwork. We're terminating the lease effective today and the contents go to scrap. Well. Ethan scratched the back of his neck. That's actually why I called your office Monday. You called my office? I did. Left a message with a woman named Denise. About? I'd like to buy what's in the container. Claire Whitmore stopped moving. Then she laughed, one clean note of genuine astonishment. You want to buy it? Yes, ma'am. Mr. Walker, do you know what's in that container? I do. 6 dead engines. She said it like she was reading a grocery list. 6 failed prototypes from a discontinued program. They don't run. They never ran right. The tooling for them doesn't exist anymore. There's no title, no documentation, no serial registry. I had a team spend 2 days on it, and the only thing they found is a line item that says dispose. I know what it says. Then why on God's green earth would you want them? Ethan looked at her for a second. It was a long second. Because I've got a use for them, he said. What use? Parts. Parts. Yes, ma'am. She stared at him. Then she said, Show me. He walked her out to the container. Ray followed at a distance, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. The padlock was Ethan's. He'd replaced Whitmore's when theirs rusted through in 2019, and nobody ever came to check. He turned the key and hauled the door, and the hinges screamed like they resented being woken. Inside, on custom steel cradles that no scrapyard in America builds, sat 6 engines under 6 canvas covers side by side like sleeping animals. Reyes actually said, "Whoa." Claire stepped up into the container. She pulled a cover off the first one, and dust rolled off in a sheet. God, look at this thing. She waved a hand in front of her face. It's a museum of failure. It's a V8, Ethan said. It's a paperweight. She rapped a knuckle on the head. You know what my father used to call this program? The money pit. $11 million into a racing engine program that produced 6 units and 1 lawsuit. He killed it himself. That's in the minutes. Is it? March of 2018. Board voted 8-0. She turned around. So no, Mr. Walker, I'm not going to pretend there's some sentimental value here. My father was a great man who made exactly one bad bet, and I've spent 2 years cleaning up after it. Something crossed Ethan's face. It was there and gone so fast that only Ray, who'd known him 19 years, caught it. How much? Ethan said. Excuse me, to buy them. How much? Claire looked at the 6 engines. She was doing arithmetic, not on value, on nuisance. Hauling 6 engines out of a container down a county road cost money. Certified scrapping cost money. Signatures cost money. And she had 400 other line items to burn before the quarterly board meeting. Reyes, what's the disposal estimate? 14,200, ma'am, plus transport. Right. She turned back to Ethan. 4,000. Cash. As is where is no warranty, and you sign a release that says Whitmore Motors bears no liability if one of these things blows up and takes your barn with it. It's a garage. It's a barn with tools in it. Ray made a low sound behind them. Ethan didn't take the bait. 4,000, he said. I can do 4,000. Cash today. Today. She narrowed her eyes because it had been too easy, and people who grow up rich learn to distrust easy. Why? She said again. Really? And here, this was the moment, and he'd known it was coming since Monday, and he'd rehearsed it in the shower and in the truck, and lying awake at 3 a.m. Here he could have said it. Because I designed them. Because that's my handwriting on the cam covers. Because your father sat in a folding chair in a Michigan test cell at 2 in the morning and cried when number 4 hit its numbers, and then 11 weeks later, he stopped taking my calls, and I have spent 8 years trying to understand why. He looked at her at Arthur Whitmore's jawline. Arthur Whitmore's habit of tipping her head when she was suspicious, and he made a choice that would cost him almost everything before it made him anything. Parts, he said. Like I told you. They did the paperwork on the hood of the Range Rover because Claire didn't want to sit in the office, and she wasn't subtle about why. Reyes filled in blanks. Ethan went to the safe in the back, a floor safe under a rubber mat, a habit from a life he didn't talk about, and came back with $400 bills held together with a rubber band. It was every dollar he had that wasn't already owed to Dale Prentice. Ray watched him hand it over and had to look at the tree line for a minute. Claire counted it. Actually counted it in the sunlight standing in a gravel lot in front of a man who'd just given her his last dollar. 4,000, she said. Sign here, and initial the release. Ethan signed. She glanced at the signature the way people glance at signatures, not reading it, just checking there was ink. E. Walker. She'd see that signature again in about 6 weeks on a technical drawing at 1 a.m., and she'd feel it in her teeth like biting foil. Pleasure doing business, she said, and it wasn't. Then she walked back toward the open container because something had been nagging at her the whole time, and she wanted to be rid of it. She stepped up, took hold of the canvas on number 2, and pulled. And there it was, a shape she half recognized. Something about the intake geometry. Something in a photograph on her father's desk in a frame behind glass that she'd looked at 10,000 times as a child and never once asked about. She shoved the feeling down the way she'd been shoving things down for 2 years. They really are ugly, she said. They're not ugly. They're obsolete. They're 8 years old. In this industry, that's the same word. She hopped down. Do you know how much of my life I spend cleaning up my father's mistakes? Mr. Walker? Do you know what it's like to inherit a 50-year-old company at 34 and find out half of what people told you was a legend was actually just an expensive man being stubborn? No, ma'am? No, you fix trucks. There was a silence with a shape to it. Yes, ma'am, Ethan said. I fix trucks. And maybe it was the flatness of it. Maybe it was that he wouldn't argue, wouldn't get red, wouldn't give her the fight she'd driven 90 minutes looking for. Maybe it was that some part of her deep down under the coat and the title, and the 2 years of being called the daughter in rooms, where men outranked her by 40 years of experience, wanted somebody to push back so she could stop pushing. But what she did was walk to the workbench where he'd set the third engine's bare block that morning, hauled out with a chain hoist at 5 a.m. before the phone call before the sun, and she put her hand on it, and she pushed. It went over. 400 pounds of iron hit the concrete with a sound that stopped every bird in the oak tree. That, she said, is what your life's work is worth. Scrap metal. Ray took one step forward and Ethan's hand came up, not fast, not dramatic. Just up. Don't. Ethan knelt down. A bolt had sheared off and rolled. He picked it up between two fingers, looked at the threads and put it in his shirt pocket. Then he stood. "You just kicked over the only thing keeping your company alive," he said quietly. "What did you say?" "I said you should get your rear axle looked at. There's a bearing going on the driver's side. You'll hear it at 70. Claire stared at him. "Reyes," she said. "We're done." They were almost to the Range Rover when the school bus stopped at the end of the drive. Noah came up the gravel with his backpack hanging off one shoulder, and he took in the whole picture in about 2 steps. The black truck, the woman in the coat, the open container, his father standing very still. "Dad, go on inside, bud." Noah didn't go inside. 10-year-olds have a radar that never lies to them. "What did she do?" "Nothing. Go on." Noah looked past his father at the block lying on the concrete floor with a fresh scar across the deck surface. Then he looked at Claire Whitmore. "Did you knock that over?" "Noah." "Did you?" Claire, who had negotiated with a Japanese supplier consortium for 9 hours straight in February and not flinched, found herself unable to look at a 4th grader. "It was an accident," she said. "No, it wasn't." "Noah, inside, now. He works on those every Sunday," Noah said. He wasn't crying. His voice was doing the thing where it stays level by force. "Every Sunday since I was little. He doesn't even charge anybody on Sundays, 'cause that's his day for them. He says they're not broke, they're just waiting." "Noah. He says nothing's junk till the last person who understands it gives up on it." The kid's chin came up. "That's what he says." Claire stood in the gravel with $4,000 in her coat pocket. "That's a nice thing to say," she managed. "It's not a saying." Noah's ears had gone red. "He means it. He means everything he says. That's the whole thing about him." And then he turned and walked into the house, and the screen door banged, and the sound of it hung around a lot longer than it should have. Reyes was studying his shoes. Ray had gone somewhere behind the shop where he could be angry in private. Claire got in the truck. She was 11 miles down Highway 100 before she said out loud to nobody, "Why is my hand shaking?" Her phone rang at 4:07. "Victor Hale." "Claire, how'd it go in the sticks?" "Fine. Lease terminated, contents disposed of. 14,000 back on the books and 1 less liability." "Disposed how?" "Sold them, as is, to the lot owner." There was a pause on the line. It was maybe a second and a half long, and Claire Whitmore had spent 2 years learning to hear pauses. "You sold them," Victor said. "For $4,000, which is 4,000 more than scrap would have." "To who?" To who, Claire?" She pulled her earpiece out and stared at it, then put it back. "To the owner of the property. A mechanic. Why does that matter? What's his name?" "Victor." "What is his name?" "Walker," she said. "Ethan Walker." The silence that came back down the line was not a pause. It was a hole. "Victor, turn the car around." "What?" "Turn the car around and buy them back. Offer him 10. Offer him 20. I don't care what it costs. Get them on a truck tonight and get them to the Ridgeline facility where I can—" "Victor, there's 6 dead engines. You told me you sat in my office and told me the whole program was worthless." "It is." "Then why—" "Because there's liability, Claire." His voice smoothed out so fast she could hear the effort. "Because that program had open litigation exposure, and if some backyard grease monkey blows himself up with our intellectual property on his property, we are in a courtroom for 4 years. This is exactly the kind of thing your father would have—" "My father," Claire said slowly, "ran that program for 6 years. Your father was sentimental. You just said it was worthless. Claire, you've never once raised your voice at me in 2 years." She was watching the road, but she wasn't seeing it. "Not when we lost the Belgian contract. Not when the plant vote went sideways. And you're raising it now over $4,000 of scrap iron." "I am trying to protect you." "From what?" "Turn the car around." "No," she said, and hung up, and immediately felt like a woman who had just kicked over something much heavier than an engine block. Back at the garage, the sun went down, and Ray finally came out from behind the shop. You should have told her. No. Ethan, she's got your name on a piece of paper in that folio, and she doesn't even know it. All you had to do was open your mouth. And then what? Ethan was sweeping. He'd been sweeping the same 4 feet of concrete for a while. Then she believes the name. Then she goes back and asks Hale about the name, and Hale tells her whatever he told her father. And I'm a story again instead of a man. I've been a story. It cost me my career, and it cost Noah his mother's insurance, and I am not doing it that way twice. So what's the way? Ethan stopped sweeping. She's going to find out on her own, he said. And when she does, she's going to have to look at it with her own eyes. And there won't be a soul in the world she can unbelieve it with. Ray shook his head slowly. That's a hell of a bet on a woman who just kicked over your engine. She didn't kick over my engine. I was standing right there. She kicked over her father's, Ethan said. She just doesn't know it yet. He put Noah to bed at 9:30 and sat on the edge of the mattress the way he had every night for 6 years, since a hospital hallway in Knoxville and a doctor who used the word aggressive 4 times in 90 seconds. Dad? Yeah. Are we going to lose the shop? Ethan didn't answer fast. He never lied to the kid. That was the one rule that had survived everything. It's tight, he said. How tight? 12 days tight. Noah absorbed that. Is that why you bought the engines to sell the parts? Something like that. Dad? The kid rolled onto his side. You've had those engines 8 years, and you never sold one part off them. Not one. Mr. Ray asked you for a fuel rail in like 2021, and you said no. You remember that? I remember everything about them, Noah said, because you don't talk about anything else that way. Ethan sat there in the dark with his hands hanging between his knees. Go to sleep. Dad. Go to sleep, Noah. Was that lady right? Did they fail? And Ethan Walker, 38 years old, 41 days past, due $4,000 poorer than he'd been that morning, said the truest thing he'd said all day. No, son, they didn't fail. They got left. At 11:40 that night, he went out to the container with a shop light. He pulled the covers off all 6 of them one at a time and hung them over the cradles. Then he went back to the office, moved the rubber mat, opened the floor safe, and took out a gray steel box with a dent in the lid. He carried it out to the container and sat on an overturned bucket, and he opened it. Inside a thick roll of drawings on vellum, the old kind blueprint blue and soft at the folds. A test cell logbook with a coffee ring on the cover. A photograph of 11 people in a Michigan parking lot in the snow, all of them laughing, an old man in the middle with his arm around a younger one. And a single sheet of Whitmore Motors letterhead dated 11 weeks before everything came apart. Ethan unrolled the top drawing under the shop light. In the title block in the space marked, "Approved by" in blue ballpoint that had faded but not gone. Ethan Walker, Chief Performance Engineer. And underneath it, in a second hand, in the space marked, Program Director. A signature he'd have known anywhere on this earth. Arthur J. Whitmore. Ethan looked at it a long time. Then he reached over and laid his hand flat on the cam cover of engine number 6, the one nobody at Whitmore Motors had ever seen, run the one that had been on the dyno at 2:14 in the morning on the day the phone stopped ringing, and he said it out loud alone in a shipping container in a gravel lot outside Nashville to a machine. All right, he said, let's wake you up. At 4:50 the next morning, the shop light was still burning in the container, and Ethan Walker had not slept. Ray Dunlop found him there with the logbook open on his knees and a socket wrench balanced across the top of engine number 1 like a man keeping his place in a Bible. You been out here all night? Some of it? All of it. I can see the coffee cups from the road. Ray set down a thermos and looked at the 6 of them sitting there uncovered for the first time in 8 years. Well, there they are. There they are. You got a plan or you got a feeling? I got 12 days, Ethan said. 11 now. Ray crouched down beside number 1 and put a hand on the block, the way a farrier puts a hand on a horse slow, letting it know he was there. What's she need? Everything. Seals are dead. Rings are probably fused. Wiring harness has been sitting in Tennessee humidity since Obama's second term. Ethan flipped a page. But the internals were dry when we crated them. Arthur made them dry it out for 9 days before they went in. He was paranoid about moisture. Arthur. Mr. Whitmore. You called him Arthur just now. Ethan didn't look up. Yeah. Ray let out a long breath through his nose. 8 years I've worked in this lot and you ain't said that man's name out loud one time. I know. And now his daughter drives out here, knocks over your block, and suddenly it's Arthur. Ray. I'm just saying it's a strange week. It's Tuesday, Ethan said. At 6:40, Noah came out in his boots with his shirt half tucked and stopped dead at the container door. They're uncovered. Yeah. All 6. All 6. Noah walked down the row and touched each one on the way past once like he was counting them. Then he turned around with his whole face lit up in a way that made Ethan's chest hurt. Are we doing it? We're trying it. That's not the same as doing it. No, Ethan said. It isn't. Dad? Noah crossed his arms. Just say we're doing it. Ethan looked at his son standing there in boots 2 sizes too big because they were on sale at the co-op, and he said, We're doing it. Noah made a sound like a firecracker going off in a coffee can and ran back toward the house yelling something about a notebook. Ray watched him go. You got any idea what that first one's gonna cost you in parts? $900 if I'm lucky. And you've got what in the drawer? $61, Ethan said. And a jar of quarters Noah's been saving for a telescope. Ray was quiet a second. You're gonna take the quarters. I'm gonna borrow the quarters. At 8:15 that morning, 90 miles north in a glass building with her father's name on the front of it, Claire. Whitmore walked past her own office and went down to the sublevel where the archive was. The archivist was a woman named Denise Fowler, who had worked at Whitmore Motors for 31 years and had a way of looking at executives like she'd seen 4 of them come and go and would probably see 4 more. Ms. Whitmore, you never come down here. I need program files. The Performance Division 2015 through 2018. That's a lot of boxes. I've got all day. No, you don't, Denise said. You've got a board prep at 11. I read the calendar every morning. It's the only interesting thing on the network. Claire almost smiled. Then let's be efficient. Denise pulled a cart and walked her down a row of shelving, and at the end of it, she stopped and something changed in her posture. Which program? The one they called the Money Pit. Uh-huh. Denise didn't move. Can I ask why? Because I sold 6 engines yesterday for $4,000, and my chief executive officer told me to turn my car around on the highway to buy them back at any price, and then told me they were worthless in the same conversation. Denise put a hand on the shelf. Victor said that. Victor said that. Well? The older woman pulled a box down and set it on the cart, and then a second one, and then she stopped with her hand on the third. Ms. Whitmore, I've got 22 months to my pension. I'm not following. I think you are. Claire went very still. Denise, is there something in these boxes? There's a hole in these boxes, Denise said. That's different. At 9:02, Claire had the first box open on a steel table under a light that buzzed. Test reports. Supplier invoices. A photograph of 11 people in a snowy parking lot that she set aside without really looking at, and then picked up again 8 seconds later and looked at hard, because her father was in the middle of it, with his arm around a younger man, and he was laughing in a way she had personally seen maybe 6 times in her whole life. Who is that? Which one? The one my father's holding on to. Denise leaned over, took a long moment. That's the engineer? She said. The engineer has a name. Most of them do. Denise. His file's not in there, Denise said. That's the hole I mentioned. Claire looked up. Personnel files don't just disappear. They don't, Denise agreed. Which is how you know somebody moved that one on purpose. At 9:40, Claire found the program summary, and that was the first time her stomach turned over. Because the summary said the program was terminated in March of 2018 for failure to meet performance targets, and 11 pages behind the summary was a dyno report from January of 2018 with numbers on it that were not failures. She read the numbers 3 times. Then she called upstairs. "Get me Ellis in powertrain. Now, not after his meeting." Marcus Ellis came down in 11 minutes with his tie still on the outside of his jacket from running. "Ms. Whitmore, look at this and tell me what I'm looking at." He looked. His face did something complicated. "Where'd you get this?" "Answer the question." "This is a 440 cubic inch naturally aspirated V8, pulling 906 horsepower on pump gas at a cell temperature of 91 degrees. He set the page down carefully, like it might go off. "In 2018. Is that good?" "Ms. Whitmore, in 2018, that was not good, that was not possible." "Explain." "Everybody was doing this with forced induction, turbo superchargers. Nobody was getting near this naturally aspirated without exotic materials and a race fuel budget." Ellis picked the page back up. "And the durability column. Look at the durability column. 200 hours at 90% load, and it came apart clean at teardown. So it worked. So it worked better than anything we have on the floor right now," Ellis said. "And I've been here 6 years and I have never heard of it." Claire heard her own voice come out flat. "The board minutes say it failed to meet targets." "Then somebody rewrote the targets," Ellis said. "Or somebody rewrote the results, and either way, ma'am, I'd like to not be in this room." At 10:55, Victor Hale was standing in her office doorway when she came up. He was 55 and silver and comfortable, and he had been at the company since Claire was in middle school, and he had held her hand at her father's funeral and told her the family always survives. "You went to the archive." "News travels. Denise called compliance because she's supposed to log any executive access. That's protocol, not conspiracy." He came in and sat down, without being asked which he had done for 2 years, and which she had never once minded until that exact moment. "Claire, about the phone call yesterday. You yelled at me." "I did, and I've thought about it all night, and I owe you an apology." He put both hands flat on his knees. "You want to know why I lost my composure?" "Very much. Because that name blindsided me." Victor let out a breath. Ethan Walker was an engineer here, a talented one. He also did something that nearly took this company down, and your father, God rest him, protected that man's reputation on the way out the door, because your father could not stand to destroy anybody. Claire's mouth was dry. "What did he do?" "He falsified test data." "You're going to have to say that again." "He inflated dyno results on that engine program to keep his funding," Victor said. $11 million, Claire. He knew the thing couldn't hit the numbers, so he wrote numbers that it couldn't hit. When it came out, your father shut the program down in a day, and Walker was gone by Friday. No lawsuit, no press. Arthur ate the loss. Claire sat down slowly in her own chair. "You have documentation of that?" "I have my memory of it. I was in the room." "That's not documentation." "Claire." "Victor, I was in the archive for 2 hours, and I found a dyno sheet with 906 horsepower on it, and a powertrain director who almost passed out looking at it." Something moved behind Victor Hale's eyes very fast, and it was the first time in 2 years she'd seen him need a second. "That," he said gently, "is exactly the document I'm talking about. That's the fraud. That's the piece of paper that ended his career." And it was a good answer. It was such a good answer that Claire nodded and said, "All right," and Victor left believing he had put the fire out. He did not know that at 9:40 that morning, Marcus Ellis had said the words came apart clean at teardown, and that a teardown report is not a claim. A teardown report is a corpse on a table. You cannot falsify a teardown of an engine that never ran. Claire sat alone in her office until 11:20 and did not go to her board prep. At 12:30 back in Tennessee, Ethan had number 1 on the stand, and the valve covers off, and he was leaning over it, not breathing. "Ray?" "Yeah." "Come look at this." Ray came and looked, and said a word that Noah pretended not to hear from the doorway. "Somebody's been in here." "Yeah." "Ethan, that lifter's been pulled and reseated. That ain't factory. That's a hand doing that." "I know whose hand." "Whose?" "Mine," Ethan said. "That's my work. That's the night before the crate. So I never got to put the covers back on," Ethan said. "I got walked out of the building at 4 in the afternoon with a box of pictures and a coffee mug. Somebody else buttoned it up." He straightened. "And whoever did it torqued this to about 35 foot-pounds when the spec is 22. Ray frowned. "That'd crack a rail eventually." "It'd crack a rail in about 40 hours of runtime. On purpose. On somebody's instruction," Ethan said, "or somebody who didn't care because they knew it was never going to run again." Noah spoke up from the door. "Dad, that's evidence. Go do your homework. It's summer. Go do next year's." At 2:15, a car neither of them recognized came up the county road and did not park crooked. It parked politely, which was somehow worse. The man who got out was in his 40s, no-tie soft shoes, and he was smiling before the door was shut. "Mr. Walker Dennis Boyd. I'm a broker. Industrial equipment salvage specialty stuff." He put out a hand, and Ethan shook it, and Ethan's whole spine went cold because the man's palm was smooth as a bank statement. "Broker. I represent a collector who heard you came into some historical racing hardware, prototype Vi-8S. Heard from who? Word gets around." "It got around in 19 hours, Ethan said. "That's a hell of a mailing list." Boyd laughed the way people laugh when nothing's funny. "My client's prepared to be aggressive. 25,000 for the lot. Cash today. I've got a flatbed 40 minutes out." Ray from behind the toolbox said, 25. "Cash," Boyd said. "Today." And there it was, sitting in the air of that garage. $25,000. 11 days of runway turned into 11 months. The banknote gone. Noah's telescope. New boots that fit. Ethan felt his own hand start to reach for it and pulled it back. "No. Mr. Walker, I want to be straight with you. Those units have no title chain, no documentation, no provenance. That number is not going to be there tomorrow." "That's fine. 30. "No. $40,000, Mr. Walker." Boyd's smile had gotten thin around the edges. $40,000 for 6 pieces of scrap you paid 4 for. That is 10 times your money in one day, and I am standing in a garage with a hole in the roof. Ethan looked at him a long moment. "Who's the collector?" "Private party." "Name?" "That's confidential." "Then here's mine," Ethan said. "Not for sale. Not at 40, not at 400. Go on home." Boyd stood there for 4 full seconds with the smile completely gone off his face, and what was underneath it was not a broker. "You're going to regret this," he said, and it came out flat and quiet and entirely sincere. Then he got in the car and left, and Ray said, "Ethan, I know. That fellow was not a broker. I know. $40,000, Ethan." "I know what it was," Ethan said, and his voice cracked right down the middle for the first time in 8 years. "Don't you think I know what it was?" Noah came out of the house then, and neither of them had heard the screen door, which meant he'd been standing behind it. "Dad, that was a lot of money." "It was. We need money." "We do. So why?" Ethan crouched down so they were eye level, which he had not done in about a year because the kid was getting tall. "Because a man showed up 19 hours after we uncovered them, offering 10 times what they're worth, and wanting them on a truck the same day," Ethan said. "You know what that means? That they're worth way more than 40. "It means somebody's scared of them," Ethan said. "And I want to know why before I let 'em go." Noah nodded slowly. Then he said, "Can I ask a question that's going to make you mad?" "Probably." Were you famous? Ethan stood up. Go get your jar, he said. We're going to the parts store. At 4:45, Claire Whitmore did something she had not done since the day of the funeral, which was drive to her father's house and let herself in. It smelled the same. That was the worst part, it always was. She went to his study, and she stood in front of the desk where the photograph was in a frame behind glass, the one she had looked at 10,000 times as a child. 11 people in a snowy parking lot in Michigan. She had never once asked who they were. It was just Dad's picture. It was furniture. She took it out of the frame and turned it over, and on the back, in her father's handwriting, in pencil cell, 4 February. The night it hit, 9:06. Best night of my working life. Claire sat down on the floor of her dead father's study in a $4,000 coat and put her hand over her mouth. At 6:30, she was still there, and she had gone through 2 drawers, and in the bottom one, under a box of ties, she found a manila envelope with nothing written on it. Inside was a letter. It was typed on his letterhead and signed in ink, and it was dated 11 weeks before the program was terminated, and it was addressed to Ethan Walker at an address in Michigan, and it had never been mailed because the envelope had no stamp and no postmark, and it had been sitting in a drawer under a box of ties for 8 years. She read the first line. Ethan, I am writing this because I have not been able to say it on the phone. She read the whole thing twice, and then she stopped being able to see it. At 7:15, Denise Fowler answered her personal phone on the second ring. Ms. Whitmore, it's after hours. Denise, I need you to tell me what happened in March of 2018. I'd rather not. I know. 22 months to my pension, ma'am. I know that too, Claire said. And I'm asking anyway, and I'm asking because I just found a letter my father wrote to a man and never sent. And I have a horrible feeling I sold that man his own life's work yesterday for $4,000, and then knocked one of them on the floor in front of his son. There was a very long pause on the line. You did what to his son? Denise. All right. The older woman's voice changed. All right, not on the phone. There's a diner on Route 70 outside Dixon. 7:30 tomorrow morning. Bring nothing with a company logo on it. At 8:20 that night, Ethan had the first cylinder head off, and Ray had his reading glasses on, and neither of them had said anything in 20 minutes. Then Ray said, Well, I'll be damned. Yeah. 0 scoring. 0. After 200 hours. After 211? Ethan said. I ran the last 11 myself, and I never wrote them down. Ray sat back on his heels. Why not? Because on hour 211 the phone rang, and it was legal telling me to be in a conference room at 9 the next morning. Noah from the top of a bucket, where he'd been quiet for an hour, said, What happened in the conference room? Ray said, Noah. No, Ethan said. He can hear it. He set the wrench down. There were 4 people in that room, he said. A lawyer I'd never seen, 2 men from finance, and Victor Hale. Who's Victor Hale? He ran the money side. Still does, I'd guess. Ethan wiped his hands. They put a sheet of paper in front of me. My dyno report from January. And they asked me to confirm my signature. And it was my signature, Ethan said, and it was not my report. Ray took his glasses off. Say that again. Somebody took my January sheet and changed 3 numbers and left my name on the bottom, only they changed them the wrong direction. They made the engine look better than it was. Why would anybody do that? Because if the numbers are impossible, Ethan said, then the engineer's a liar. And if the engineer's a liar, then the program's a fraud. And if the program's a fraud, you can shut it down in a day and nobody in that boardroom ever asks what happened to the technology. But the real numbers were already good, Noah said. The real numbers were 906. The sheet said 961. That's barely different. It's different enough to be impossible, Ethan said. And that's the whole trick, son. You don't get caught lying big. You get caught lying just past the edge of believable. Ray said very quietly. And Arthur Whitmore believed it. Ethan didn't answer for a while. I don't know, he said finally. For 8 years I've told myself he did. It's easier. At 9:50, Noah went to bed and Ethan sat with the steel box open on the workbench, and he took out the sheet of letterhead he had not read in 6 years, and did not need to read because he had it memorized, and he put it back without unfolding it. Ray watched him do it. What's on that page? Nothing. Ethan, it's a letter he wrote me. It came in the mail 2 weeks after the shutdown. No return address, no signature. 6 lines. Ethan closed the box. It says if anything ever comes back around, do not let them near cell 4 data. Trust nobody in this building. I am sorry. Ray sat down hard on a stool. You've had that for 8 years. I have. And you never took it anywhere. Take it where Ray. Ethan's voice went up for the first time all week. Unsigned page from a dead man. I had a 4-year-old with no mother and a lawyer bill I was paying off at $90 a month. Who was I going to hand that to? The FBI. A newspaper. I had one thing that mattered in the world, and he was asleep in the back room, and I was not going to spend the next 6 years in a deposition. So you sat on it. I sat on it. And now his daughter's driving around in a truck with a bad wheel bearing and no idea. Now his daughter's driving around. Ethan agreed. At 6:04 the next morning, Claire Whitmore's phone rang while she was still in the driveway of the diner, and it was Victor Hale. You're up early. So are you. Claire, where are you? On the road. Which road? She looked at the phone in her hand for a full second. Victor, why do you need to know which road? I don't need to know which road. I'm making conversation. A pause. We have a situation. The engines. What about them? I sent someone to acquire them back, discreetly, as a broker. Claire's grip tightened. You did what? I offered $40,000 of my own money to make a liability disappear, and he turned it down. Which tells me he knows exactly what he has, and he is going to use it, and I need you to understand that this man is not a mechanic. Claire, this man has been sitting in a garage for 8 years, waiting for this. For what? Waiting for what Victor say the sentence. Waiting to come back at this company. For what he says was done to him. For what he did. Then why? Claire said, and she was surprised at how steady her voice came out. Did you spend $40,000 of your own money on a liability that a corporate insurance policy would have covered for free? The silence on the other end of that line was so long she checked the screen to see if the call had dropped. Come into the office, Victor said. We'll talk. I'll be in this afternoon. Claire. She hung up and went inside where Denise Fowler was in a corner booth with 2 coffees and a face like a woman who had not slept either. You look terrible, Denise said. Thank you. I mean it as a kindness. It means you're paying attention now. Denise pushed a coffee across the table. Before I say anything, I need you to know I've got no proof of a single thing I'm about to tell you. Understood. And I need you to know I liked your father very much, and this is going to hurt. Claire wrapped both hands around the cup. Say it. Ethan Walker didn't falsify anything, Denise said. I typed the original January report into the system myself. 906. I have looked at the version in the archive 4 times in 8 years, and it says 961, and the file metadata says it was modified on the 11th of March at 11:40 at night, and I know exactly one person who was still badging into that building at 11:40 at night that week. Denise, I'm not saying his name in a diner. You don't have to. Claire's throat had closed up. What did my father do? Your father shut the program down. Why? Because on the 12th of March, somebody sat him down and showed him that piece of paper, Denise said, and Arthur Whitmore was the kind of man who could survive losing $11 million, but he could not survive being made a fool of by a young man he loved. So he pulled the plug in about 40 minutes, and by the time he cooled down and started asking questions, Walker was gone and the story was set. He knew, Claire whispered. Later. He knew later. I think he suspected. He knew. He wrote him a letter. Claire's hand was shaking so badly the coffee moved. He wrote him a letter 11 weeks before the shutdown that says he was going to name that engine after him. And then he wrote him another one after, and he never mailed either one. And he put 6 of those engines in a shipping container on that man's property and paid the lease on it for 8 years and never told a soul. Denise Fowler set down her cup. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "the lease was paid by accounts payable under a facilities code." "Yes. Nobody's ever asked me this, so I'll offer it. That facilities code was opened in April of 2018, and it was authorized by one signature, and I've seen it 100 times on requisitions." "Whose?" "Arthur J. Whitmore," Denise said. "Personally. Every year. He renewed it 8 times. Claire put both hands over her face and made a sound she had not made at the funeral. "He wasn't storing them," she said into her palms. "He was leaving them with him." "That's what I've always thought," Denise said quietly. "He put them where the only man who could ever wake them up was standing." At 8:40, Claire was in the parking lot with her keys in her hand and her forehead against the roof of the truck, and her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't have saved. It was Reyes from the Folio, from the gravel lot. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm probably going to get fired for this. Compliance pulled the container file this morning at Mr. Hale's request, and the entire record is gone. Lease payments all 8 years. I made a copy on Tuesday because you told me to be thorough." Then a second text. "I have it on a drive. Where do you want it?" And Claire Whitmore stood in a diner parking lot outside Dixon, Tennessee, 90 minutes from a garage she had walked out of 2 days earlier, and typed back 4 words with her thumbs shaking. "Don't move. I'm coming." At 9:15 that morning, Reyes was sitting in his car behind a hardware store in Dixon with the engine off and the windows down, and when Claire pulled in beside him, he looked like a man waiting on a jury. "Ms. Whitmore, get in my truck." "I'd rather stay in mine." "Reyes. If somebody drives by, I'd rather be a guy sitting in his own car," he said. "Ma'am, I've been employed 11 months. I have a wife who's 7 months along." "Then give me the drive and go home." He handed it through the window. It was a black plastic thing the size of a stick of gum, and it felt like nothing at all. "It's all there," he said. "The lease file, 8 renewals. And I'll tell you something else because I'm already in this. When compliance pulled the record this morning, they didn't archive it. Archiving leaves a stub. They ran a purge." "What's the difference?" "The difference is an archive is a file you moved," Reyes said. "A purge is a file that was never born." Claire closed her hand around the drive. "Who ordered it?" "The ticket says Facilities Cleanup. The approver field says V. Hale." "He put his own name on it." "That's what I thought too," Reyes said. "Then I figured it out. He's not hiding it from you, ma'am. He's got no reason to hide anything from you. You're the one person in that building who's never once asked him a question." At 9:40 her phone rang, and it was the front desk at Whitmore Motors telling her that Marcus Ellis from Powertrain had been placed on administrative leave pending a review of information security. She pulled the truck onto the shoulder and sat there with the hazards going. "On whose authority?" "It came through the chief executive's office, ma'am." "I am the chief executive." There was an extremely uncomfortable pause. "Ms. Whitmore, the ticket says Office of the Chief Executive. Mr. Hale's assistant submits under that heading. She's done it for years." Claire heard the whole architecture of the last 2 years reorganize itself in her head in about 4 seconds. "How many years?" "I'd have to check." "Check." "Since April of 2018, the woman said. "That's when the delegation was created." At 10:20, Ethan Walker was under the front of engine number 1 with a light in his teeth when Ray said company. "Tell them we're closed." "It's a county car." Ethan came out from under it. The deputy was somebody he knew, which in that county was not unusual, and in that moment was not comforting. His name was Wendell Pate, and he had gone to high school with Ethan's older cousin, and he looked like a man who did not want to be doing what he was doing. "Morning, Ethan." "Wendell, I got a report of stolen property." Ray said, "You have got to be kidding me." Filed this morning out of Nashville. Corporate. 6 industrial engines, no serials taken from a leased container. Wendell had a folded paper in his hand, and he was holding it like it was hot. Says here they were removed without authorization. I bought them, Ethan said. You got paper. I got a bill of sale signed by the chief executive officer of the company 2 days ago, and $4,000 of my money in her pocket. Well then, this'll be short, Wendell said, and he sounded honestly relieved. Let's see it. Ethan went to the office. He came back out slower than he went in. Ray read his face. What? It's gone. What do you mean it's gone? I mean I put it in the drawer under the register on Tuesday afternoon, and it is not in the drawer under the register. Nobody said anything for a second. Then Noah said from the doorway, the broker guy went in the office. Every head turned. When? Ethan said. When you and Mr. Ray were out by the container. He said he needed the bathroom. Noah's face had gone white. Dad. I didn't think. He was in there like a minute. Hey, look at me. That's not on you. It's on me. I let him in the house. Noah. Ethan took him by the shoulders. A grown man lied to you. That is a thing grown men do, and it is never once the kid's fault. You hear me? Wendell cleared his throat. Ethan, I got no discretion on this. Reports filed. Without paper, I got to secure the property. Wendell, I know. Those come off this lot. They go in a corporate yard, and I never see them again, and you know it. I know it, the deputy said miserably. Which is why I'm going to do the one thing I can do, which is tell you the truck they've got coming is out of Nashville, and it ain't going to be here before 3. Ray was already moving. Chain hoist. Ray, that's 6 engines and 1 hoist. Then we better hurry. At 11:05, Claire Whitmore called Victor Hale from a gas station and did not say hello. You filed a theft report. Good morning. You filed a theft report on a transaction I personally executed and signed. You made me a liar on a county document. I protected an asset. You called it scrap on Monday. You called it liability on Tuesday, and today it's an asset. Claire. Say the word asset again, Victor. I want to hear how it sounds. You are being emotional about a man you met one time. I'm being emotional about my father, she said, and her voice cracked, and she hated it. I found a letter in his desk. Unmailed. 11 weeks before the shutdown. The line went very quiet. What letter? You know what I'm going to ask you now. Claire, do not. Did you change the January report? That is an accusation that ends careers. It ended one, Claire said. In 2018. I'm going to hang up, Victor said. And I'm going to pretend you didn't say that. And tomorrow you're going to come in, and we'll sit down with counsel, and we'll talk about how a woman in your position handles a rumor from a records clerk with a grudge. I never said Denise. Silence. I never said one word about Denise Fowler, Claire said slowly. Not to you, not to anybody. Come into the office, Victor said and hung up. At 11:50, she called Denise and got no answer. She called 4 more times. At 12:04, Denise called back from a number that wasn't hers. They walked me out, she said. She sounded calm in the way people sound calm when they have already done their crying in a stairwell. 31 years, 2 security men and a cardboard box. They put my picture of my grandbabies in the box like it was contraband. Denise, I'm so sorry. Ma'am, listen to me, because I've only got a minute. They took my badge, but they did not take my head. There were 4 terminals with Cell 4 access in 2018. 3 of them got wiped in the migration in 2020. The 4th one is a bench machine in the old Dyno building at Ridgeline, and it never got migrated because it runs software nobody's licensed since 2014. You're telling me the original calibration data still exists. I'm telling you there's a computer in a room with a padlock on it, Denise said. And I'm telling you that Victor Hale ordered the Ridgeline building decommissioned 6 weeks ago, and that the contractor is scheduled for Monday. Today's Wednesday. Yes, ma'am, it is. At 1:30, there were 4 engines in the barn behind the house, and Ethan and Ray were fighting the 5th up a plank ramp with a come-along when Claire Whitmore's truck came up the road. Ray saw her first. "Oh, you have got to be joking." "Keep pulling." "Ethan?" "Keep pulling, Ray." She came across the gravel fast still in the coat, and she stopped about 10 feet from them and said, "They're coming at 3. Ethan didn't turn around. "I know. I can stop it." "No, you can't. It's filed." "I can call the sheriff's office and withdraw the complaint. I signed the bill of sale. I'm the seller. It's my word against a piece of paper that doesn't exist anymore." Ethan set the come-along and turned around. "Why?" he said. "Because it's a lie. 2 days ago, you called it a museum of failure. I know what I called it. You put your hand on a block my crew and I built with our own hands, and you shoved it on the floor in front of my kid," Ethan said. "And now you're standing in my yard at 1:30 on a Wednesday telling me you can make a phone call." Claire's chin came up. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I've spent 2 days in my father's archive and my father's house and a diner outside Dixon," she said. "And Mr. Walker, I know who you are." Ray let go of the strap. Ethan stood there, and his face did not move at all, and that was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. "Say the name," he said. "Ethan Walker, Chief Performance Engineer, Program 4400. She was breathing hard. "The photograph on my father's desk that I looked at every day of my childhood and never once asked about. You're the man he's got his arm around. That's a picture. There's a dyno sheet." "There's 2 dyno sheets," Ethan said. "That's the whole problem, ma'am. There's the one I signed, and there's the one they showed him." And Claire Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer, went ahead and said the sentence that had been sitting in her chest since a diner booth that morning. 9:06, she said, and 9:61. At 1:34, Ethan Walker sat down on the edge of the ramp because his legs stopped working. "Say those numbers again." 906, and the file in our archive says 961 modified at 11:40 at night on March 11th of 2018. "Who told you that?" "A woman who typed the original," Claire said, "and got walked out of the building this morning with 2 guards and a cardboard box for telling me." Ethan put his hands over his face. Ray said quietly, 8 years. 8 years, Claire said, "and the letter." Ethan's head came up. "What letter?" She took the envelope out of the inside pocket of her coat and held it out, and her hand was not steady. "He wrote it 11 weeks before the shutdown. He never mailed it. It was under a box of ties." "I don't want it." "Yes, you do." "Ma'am, I have spent 8 years learning not to want anything from that family." "Then take it because he wrote it," Claire said. "And there's nobody else left alive it belongs to." At 1:41, Ethan Walker read a letter from a dead man standing in his own driveway with his son watching through a screen door and a woman he had known for 2 days holding the empty envelope. It was 6 paragraphs. The last one said that when the program went to production, the engine would carry a name and that Arthur Whitmore had put it in front of the board in February and been voted down, and that he intended to put it in front of them again in April, and that he did not care how many times they voted, because a man ought to be able to point at a thing in this world and say, "I made that." The name he had proposed was the Walker 8. Ethan folded it back along the same creases the old man had made. Then he said in a voice nobody in that yard had heard before, "Ray, get me the second hoist out of the container." "Ethan, get me the hoist." "Son, it's 1:45 and they're coming at 3. "They're not coming," Claire said. She already had the phone to her ear. "Yes, this is Claire Whitmore. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Motors, and I'm calling to withdraw a complaint number." "Hold on, Reyes. What's the thank you?" "I'm calling to withdraw it in its entirety and to state that the property in question was sold lawfully by me personally on Monday afternoon, and I will put that in writing this afternoon, and I will drive it to your office myself." She listened for a second. "Yes," she said. "I'm aware of what perjury is. Are you aware of who filed it? At 2:20, the four of them stood in the barn with all 6 engines finally on the concrete and nobody knowing what to say. Noah broke it. Are you the lady from Monday? Noah, Ethan said. I am, Claire said. You knocked over the block. I did. Why? And Claire Whitmore, who had handled a 9-hour supplier negotiation in February without blinking, stood in a barn in Tennessee and gave a 10-year-old the honest answer. Because I was angry at my father, she said, and he's dead, so I can't be angry at him, and your dad was standing there. Noah thought about it. That's a bad reason. It's a terrible reason. But it's a real one, the kid said, and then he stuck out his hand like a small adult. Noah Walker. Claire shook it and had to look at the wall for a second. At 2:45 they got to the part that mattered, and it was Ray who said it. All right, family reunion's real touching. She still won't run. Ethan nodded slowly. No, she won't. Claire looked between them. You said the internals are clean. Internals are perfect. Ring seal's fine, the bearings are fine, the head's a work of art if I do say it. Ethan wiped his hands on the rag. It's the brain. That engine ran a variable timing strategy that took us 19 months to develop, and it lives in software. Without it, it's a 440 cubic inch air pump. It'll idle. It'll rev to about 4,000 and then it'll start eating itself. So write it again. Ray laughed out loud, one hard bark. Ma'am, Ethan said, that's 19 months of dyno time and about 600 hours of cell work. I've got 9 days and a jar of quarters. Then where's the original? It was in cell 4. Cell 4, Claire said, at Ridgeline. Ethan went still. How do you know that name? Because a woman got fired this morning for telling me that there's one bench machine in that building that never got migrated, Claire said, and that the demolition contractor comes Monday. Ray sat down on a bucket. Well, he said, ain't that something? At 3:10, Ethan said no. Absolutely not. It's my company. It's his company, Ethan said, pointing at nothing meaning everything. And you've got a chief financial officer who ran a purge on a lease file this morning and fired 2 people before lunch, and he is going to be watching that badge system like a hawk on a fence post. So I won't badge in. Oh, that's better. Mr. Walker, you go in there tonight and get caught. You're not a chief executive anymore. You're a woman on a security tape in a building she ordered decommissioned, Ethan said. He'll have you out at the next board meeting, and there'll be a story ready to go before your car leaves the lot. I know because I've seen the man do it. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Then come with me. Ray said, Oh, Lord. You know the room, she said. You know the machine. You know what file to look for, and I don't. If I go alone, I could stand in front of the right computer for 4 hours and never know it. And if I get caught, I'm a felon with a kid. Yes, Claire said. That's the actual math, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. At 3:40, Noah came out and stood in the doorway. Dad. Not now, bud. Dad, you're gonna go. I didn't say that. You're gonna go, Noah said. You've got the face. At 9:20 that night, they took Ray's truck because Ray's truck had a toolbox and Tennessee plates and no reason to be anywhere. Ray drove. Nobody talked much for the first 40 minutes. Then Claire said, Can I ask you something? You can ask. Why didn't you fight it in 2018? Why didn't you sue? Ethan looked out the window. I had a wife with stage 3 and a 4-year-old, he said. Insurance ran through my employment. The day they walked me out, that clock started. I had 90 days of COBRA I could barely pay for, and a lawyer telling me a wrongful termination case against a company that size runs 3 to 5 years. Oh. I did the math on a legal pad at the kitchen table, Ethan said. Fighting them cost me every hour I had left with her, so I didn't fight them. Claire didn't say anything for about a mile. How long did she have? 14 months. Was it enough time? No, ma'am, Ethan said. But it was all of it. Every hour. She never spent one of them alone. Ray reached over and turned the radio off, which was the only thing he had to give. At 10:35, they parked behind a fence line 400 yards off the Ridgeline access road, and Claire pulled a key ring out of her coat pocket. Ethan looked at it. "What is that?" "My father's. That building's been on a badge system since 2016. "The main doors are," Claire said. "The old Dino Annex has a mechanical lock because it's a 1974 building, and it was never worth the retrofit. And my father kept a key to every door he ever built on this ring for 40 years. And I have been carrying it in my purse for 2 years because I couldn't make myself take it off." Ray whistled low. "Which one is it?" Ethan said. "I have no idea. There's 60. At 10:52, the fourth key turned. At 10:53, Ethan Walker walked into a room he had not stood in since March of 2018 and had to put his hand on the wall. "You okay?" Claire whispered. "There's a mark on that floor." "What?" "Right there. That burn mark. That's from a header that came off the cell 4 exhaust at 2 in the morning and rolled about 9 feet. Ethan's voice was doing something strange. "Your father stomped it out with his own shoe. Cost him a $400 loafer. He laughed about it for a year." Claire put her hand over her mouth. "Where's the machine?" she said. At 11:04, they found it under a tarp, and it was dead, and Ray said the words nobody wanted to hear. Power's cut to the building. Panel. Panels in the main hall, and the main hall is badged. Ethan crouched by the machine and pulled the tarp all the way off, and then he laughed, which was not what anybody expected. "What?" Claire said. "It's not the machine we need." "You just said." "I said the data's on a bench machine," Ethan said. "The data's on a bench machine because that's where we backed it up. But Cell 4 had a hard write logger because I didn't trust the network because in 2017 we lost 11 days of runs to a server migration, and I swore I'd never do it again." "Meaning what?" "Meaning every calibration table that engine ever saw got burned to a cartridge in a steel box bolted under the control desk," Ethan said. "And that box has never been on a network, and that box does not need power." Ray was already moving. "Where's the desk?" At 11:19, they got the box open with a pry bar, and Ethan Walker took out 4 data cartridges wrapped in a rubber band with a strip of masking tape on the top one and on the tape in his own handwriting. From 8 years ago, it said, "Cell 4, final, do not discard." Nobody said anything at all. Then Claire said, "Is that it?" "That's 19 months, Ethan said. At 11:41, headlights came down the access road. Ray saw them first through the annex window. "We got company." "Contractor. Contractor doesn't come at midnight on a Wednesday." The car stopped about 80 yards out and sat there with its lights on and did not move. "Get down," Ethan said. "Who is it?" Claire whispered. "Ma'am, in my experience, it's a fellow who wants to know if this door's been opened." They lay on the floor of a decommissioned Dino Annex for 19 minutes, while a car idled outside, and at 12 o'clock exactly, it backed up, turned around, and left. Ray let his forehead down onto the concrete. "I'm 61 years old," he said. "I want that on the record." At 12:40 in the morning, they were back on the highway, and Claire finally asked the question she'd been holding since the barn. "When we get these into the engine, what happens?" "Best case, she makes 906 horsepower for about 100 hours, and I sell the story to somebody who cares." "And realistically?" "Realistically," Ethan said, "she makes more." Ray glanced over. "Come again." "Those tables are from January," Ethan said. "The last 11 hours, I ran hours 201 through 211. I was running an experimental map I wrote on a legal pad at 4 in the morning, and I never got to write it to the logger because that's the night the phone rang." "So it's gone," Claire said. "No, ma'am." "Then where is it?" Ethan Walker tapped the side of his own head. "You remember it?" Claire said. 8 years. I've thought about it every single day for 8 years, he said. Some men count sheep. At 6:15 the next morning, day 4 of 9, Ray got the cartridges reading on a machine he'd bought at an estate auction in 2009 and never thrown away. And by noon, the first calibration table was on the screen. And by 4 o'clock that afternoon, the whole shop smelled like a fire that hadn't started yet. At 4:20, Noah came in with the phone. "Dad, it's Mr. Prentice." Ethan wiped his hands. "Dale, Ethan, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not shoot the messenger." Dale Prentice sounded like a man reading off a page. "The note on your shop got sold this morning." "Sold?" "To a purchaser on the secondary market." "It happens banks do it, but Ethan, it happened in about 4 hours, and it happened for full face value on a delinquent note, and I have never in 26 years seen anybody pay face for a delinquent note." "Who bought it?" "An LLC out of Delaware." "Dale, there's no name on it," Dale said. "There's never a name on it. That's what they're for." Ethan set the phone down very gently and stood there. Claire from across the shop said, "What?" "Somebody just bought my mortgage." At 4:45, Claire Whitmore made a phone call and then sat down on an overturned bucket and said, "It's him." "You can't know that. The registered agent on that LLC is a law firm in Wilmington," she said. "And that law firm handled my father's estate, and Victor Hale is the one who chose them." Ray said, "So what does that get him?" "It gets him the building the engines are sitting in," Ethan said. 90 days from default he can foreclose, and everything on that property gets inventoried." At 5:30 day 4, Ethan Walker did the arithmetic out loud for the first time. "We've got 9 days on the note. We've got 4 engines that need seals I can't afford, one that needs a rail I have to fabricate, and one that's ready." He looked around at them. "So we do one. We do number 6, we run her on the county dyno at Hollis Brothers, and we get somebody in the room who matters." "Who matters?" Claire said. "Ma'am, that's your department." At 8 o'clock that night, she made 11 phone calls. And on the 9th one, she got a man named Anton Rice, technical director of an international racing outfit, that had been trying to buy naturally aspirated architecture for 6 years. And he said the sentence that changed everything. 906 naturally aspirated in 2018, Rice said. "Ms. Whitmore, I have seen that number before." Claire's stomach dropped through the floor. "Where?" "In a technical dossier," Rice said, "that was shown to us in Belgium in 2021 by a consultant as intellectual property available for license." "By whom?" "I would need to check my file." "Check your file," Claire said, "and I will fly to you tomorrow." At 8:20 she came out into the barn, and her face was so white that Ray stood up. "It's worse," she said. Ethan didn't look up from the harness he was pinning. "How much worse?" "He didn't just bury it," Claire said. "He's been selling it." At 8:22, Ethan Walker set down the wiring harness and did not pick it up again for 11 minutes. "Say that again." "He's been selling it," Claire said. "Rice says a consultant brought them a technical dossier in Belgium in 2021. Naturally aspirated architecture. 906 on pump gas. Offered for license." "Offered by who?" "He's checking." "He's checking," Ethan repeated. "Ethan, 8 years I've had a story in my head," he said. "The story was that a proud old man got shown a piece of paper and lost his temper and never got around to fixing it. I could live with that story. I built a whole life on top of that story. And now the story is somebody killed a program on a Monday so he could sell it out the back door on a Tuesday," Ethan said. "And my name was the shovel he used to bury it." Ray had gone very quiet on his bucket. "Ethan," he said, "that's not theft. That's not even fraud." "I know what it is." "That's your patent portfolio walking out of the country," Ray said. "That's federal." At 3:04 in the morning, day 5, Claire's phone lit up on the workbench, where she'd fallen asleep sitting upright with her coat over her like a blanket. Anton Rice had sent 1 attachment and 4 words. "Found it. Call me." The attachment was a cover page. Not the dossier itself, just the cover, because a man in his position was not going to email 11-year-old confidential materials to a woman he'd spoken to once. At the bottom of the cover page, in a small gray box, it said the presenting party was Boyd Technical Advisory, LLC. Claire read the name 3 times before it landed. Then she stood up so fast, she knocked the bucket over. Ethan! He was already awake. He'd been awake. What? Boyd. What about him? Boyd Technical Advisory. She turned the phone around. The consultant in Belgium. It's the same man. It's the man who sat in your driveway on Tuesday and offered you $40,000. Ethan took the phone and held it a long time. Then he said quietly, he wasn't buying them for a collector. No, he was buying them because they're the only physical proof that what he's been selling on paper actually works. Ethan said, you can license a lie for 4 years. You can't hand somebody a running engine. Ray had come to the doorway in his undershirt. Boys and girls, he said, we are in a whole lot deeper than a banknote. At 6:40 that morning, Noah came out with the jar. He set it on the bench without a word, and it was heavier than it looked. 4 years of quarters, and there was a strip of masking tape on the lid where he'd written telescope in marker when he was 7. Noah? Take it. Bud. It's 200 and something, Noah said. I counted it in March. It's not nothing. Ethan looked at the jar, and then at his son, and he could not get a single word out of his throat. You told me a man ought to be able to point at a thing and say I made that, Noah said. That letter said that. I read it over your shoulder. I know I wasn't supposed to. Noah. I want to point at something too, the kid said. So take the jar. Ray turned around and studied the wall very carefully. At 7:15, Ethan took the jar and put it on the shelf above the bench where he could see it, and did not spend $1 of it, and never told the boy that. At 9:30, the parts problem was still the parts problem. Talk to me about the number, Claire said. Seals for 4 units, gaskets, a fuel rail I have to have machined because I can't fabricate that geometry with what's in this building, and a set of sensors that haven't been manufactured since 2017. Ethan ran his thumb down the list. $5,100 if I get lucky on the sensors. $7,000 if I don't. I'll write a check. No. Mr. Walker, ma'am, the day this goes in front of anybody who matters, the first thing your chief financial officer is going to say is that the chief executive officer paid for it, Ethan said. That's a conflict. That's the whole thing torpedoed by an invoice. Claire opened her mouth and closed it, because he was right, and because she'd spent 2 years being told she didn't understand governance, and here was a mechanic explaining it to her in a barn. Then how? I make some phone calls I've been not making for 8 years. At 10:05, he called a man in Ohio named Tom Buell, who had run the fabrication side of Program 4400, and who answered on the second ring and did not say hello either. Ethan Walker. Tom. 8 years. 8 years. There was a pause on the line, and then Tom Buell said in a voice that had gone thick, Is she awake? Number 6 is on the stand. Oh my God. Tom, I've got a rail I can't make, and a bank that wants my building in 8 days. Send me the print. I can't pay you. Ethan. Tom said, I have got a photograph on my refrigerator of 11 people standing in a parking lot in the snow, and my wife asks me about it twice a year, and for 8 years I have told her that we built the best engine in America, and a man in a suit told everybody we cheated. Send me the print. At 10:40, he called a woman named Priya Raghunathan in North Carolina, who had done the calibration work under him, and who cried for about 90 seconds before she said anything at all. At 11:20, he called a retired dyno operator in Kentucky named Gus Whitfield, who said only, What time Saturday? And hung up. Ray watched all 3 calls from the doorway with his arms crossed. 8 years, he said afterward. 8 years I've watched you not call those people. Yeah. Why now? Because for 8 years the only thing I had to give them was my side of a story, Ethan said. Now I've got a running engine. At 1:15 that afternoon, Victor Hale called Claire, and he had gone all the way back to calm, which frightened her more than the shouting had. I want to apologize. For which part? For the theft report. It was aggressive and it was wrong, and I've withdrawn our end of it. He let out a breath. Claire, I've been at this company 31 years. I watched you learn to ride a bike in the North Lot. I have made a mess of this week and I would like to fix it. How? Come in Monday, full board. We'll put the whole program history on the table, every document, and we'll let counsel and the audit committee sort out what happened in 2018. If I got it wrong, I'll say I got it wrong in front of 9 people and a court reporter. Claire sat down slowly. That's a reasonable offer. It's the only offer I've got. Monday. Monday at 10. A pause. One thing. The board has an item on Monday's agenda I need to prepare you for. It was filed before any of this. What item? A vote of confidence in the chief executive, Victor said gently. It's procedural. 2 of the outside directors have had concerns about your tenure since the Belgian contract. I've been holding them off for 11 months. And on Monday, you'll hold them off again. On Monday, Victor said, I'd like to be able to. Claire hung up and sat there with her hand still on the phone. Ethan from across the barn said, Well, he just told me he owns my job. She said, in the nicest voice I've ever heard him use. At 2 o'clock, she called the corporate secretary and asked one question. Who holds the voting proxy on my father's estate shares? The pause on that line lasted 6 seconds. Ms. Whitmore, that's held in trust pending final probate. I know. Who votes it? The trustee, ma'am. Who is the trustee? Mr. Hale, the secretary said. He was named in the 2017 amendment. At 2:06, Claire Whitmore learned that she had never once in 2 years actually controlled her own company. At 4:30, she came out to the barn and told them, and Ray whistled, and Ethan didn't react at all, and after a minute she said, You're not surprised. Ma'am, I got walked out of that building by a man who was smiling. So Monday is theater. Monday is a firing squad with an agenda. Then what do I do? Ethan set down the torque wrench. You stop trying to win Monday, he said. You win Saturday, and then Monday takes care of itself. At 5:45, Tom Buell called back and said the rail was on the machine and would be on a truck Friday morning, and he wasn't sending an invoice, and if Ethan mailed him one, he'd frame it. At 8:20 that night, Day 5 Dale Prentice called the shop phone. Ethan, the new holder of your note, contacted me for a payoff quote. That's routine. They asked for a quote good through Saturday at 5, Dale said. Not the maturity date, Saturday. Ethan closed his eyes. They know about the dyno. They know about something. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Day 6 Ray Dunlop drove into the lot in a car that was not his truck. Ethan came out. Where's your truck? Sold it. Ray? Fella in Fairview's been after it 2 years. Gave me $4,200 cash. Ray held up an envelope. That covers sensors and gaskets and about $110 of aggravation. Ray, you take Marla to Vanderbilt in that truck. We'll take the Buick. The Buick doesn't have air. Then we'll sweat, Ray said, and shoved the envelope into Ethan's chest, hard enough to rock him back. Now don't you say one more word about it, because I've been standing in this lot for 19 years pretending I didn't know who you were, and I'd like to be done pretending. At 6:04, Ethan Walker put his arms around a 61-year-old man in a gravel driveway, and neither of them ever mentioned it again. At 11, Priya Raghunathan's flight got into Nashville, and she came straight to the barn in a rental car with a laptop bag and walked up to engine number 6 and put both hands flat on the intake and stood there. Hi, baby, she said. Ray looked at Ethan. Ethan shrugged. Everybody talks to them, he said. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, she had the January tables loaded and running in a simulator on her laptop, and by 7 o'clock, she said the thing Ethan had been waiting 6 years of sleepless nights to hear. Ethan, these tables are conservative. I know. No, listen. Whoever wrote these was leaving margin everywhere. Look at the knock retard from 4,000 up. That's not a calibration. That's a man being careful because he had to protect a program. That was me being careful because I had to protect a program. So what's the real map? Ethan tapped his head. Priya looked at him for a long moment. Say it out loud, she said, and I'll type. At 7:12 he started talking, and he did not stop until 1:40 in the morning, and Priya Raghunathan typed for 6.5 hours, and at the end of it she sat back and said, "If this holds, that's 9:40. That's 9:45. If it holds." It held for 11 hours in 2018, Ethan said, and then a telephone rang. At 8:15 in the morning, day 7, a black car came slow past the end of the driveway, did not turn in, and kept going. Noah saw it from the porch and came running. "Dad, that's the broker guy's car." "You sure?" It had the same dent by the light. Ethan went and stood at the end of the drive with his hands in his pockets and watched the road for 11 minutes, and the car did not come back. At 8:40, he told Ray to load everything. "We're 2 days early. We're going today. Ethan, Gus doesn't get in till tonight." "Then Gus runs it tired," Ethan said, "because if that man knows where we're testing, he knows when." At 10:20, they had number 6 chained down in the bed of a borrowed flatbed with Priya's laptop in Claire's lap, and Noah wedged in the back seat with a cooler, and Ray drove 22 miles to Hollis Brothers Performance in Cheatham County, where Delmar Hollis had a water break dyno, and a bad attitude, and a debt to Ethan Walker from 2016 involving a transmission. "You want the cell today?" "I want the cell now." Delmar looked at the flatbed. "What is that?" "That's a 440 cubic inch V8. That ain't no crate motor." "No, sir." "Ethan." Delmar took his hat off. "What in the hell have you been doing out there?" At 1:15, they had it on the stand, and plumbed, and the cooling loop fighting them, and at 2:30, Gus Whitfield came through the door 4 hours early, because he'd changed his flight at his own expense, and he took one look at the engine and had to sit down on a stack of tires. "Boys," he said, "I have not slept right since March of 2018. At 3:44 they cranked it. It caught on the second turn. Nobody in that room said anything for 6 full seconds, and then Gus Whitfield started laughing in a way that turned into something else halfway through. And Noah covered his ears and grinned so hard his face hurt, and Claire Whitmore heard a sound she had been hearing on a scratchy voicemail on her father's old phone for 2 years. The one he'd left her from a test cell in 2017 that was 31 seconds of nothing but engine noise and an old man laughing. And she had never known what she was listening to. She knew now. She put her back against the wall and slid down it. At 3:51, they took it to 4,000 and it was clean. At 3:58, they took it to 5,500 and it was clean. At 4:06, Priya said, "Torque's still climbing," and her voice had gone up an octave. At 4:11, the fuel-railed Tom Buell had machined in a garage in Ohio in 36 hours, held pressure at 6,200 RPM, and Ethan Walker said, "Hold it, hold it, hold it," and Gus held it. At 4:12, the number came up on the screen, 941. Delmar Hollis said a word that made Noah's eyebrows go up. "Say it," Ethan said. 941, Priya said. "Naturally aspirated, 93 octane. Cell temp is 88. "Say it again." 941 horsepower. And Ethan Walker put both hands on the top of his head and turned in a circle in the middle of a dyno cell in Cheatham County, Tennessee, and did not say anything at all for about 20 seconds. And then he said, "Somebody call Tom." At 4:20, they shut it down and did a hot inspection, and there was nothing wrong with it. At 4:26, Claire got up off the floor. "Ethan." "Yeah. I need to ask you for something, and I need you to hear the whole sentence before you answer." "Go on." "I want to bring Anton Rice here Saturday," she said, "and I want to run it again in front of him, and I want a notarized independent verification with a certified operator and video, and I want it in my hand before 10 o'clock Monday morning." "That's 4 things." "It's one thing," Claire said. "It's a witness." At 5:40 that afternoon, Rice's assistant called back and said he would be at Nashville International at 9:40 in the morning. At 8 o'clock that night, Victor Hale called Claire for the last time before Monday. "How's Tennessee?" Claire's whole body went cold. "What?" "I said, how's Tennessee? You've been down there all week. It's not a state secret." "It's fine." "Claire." A long breath. "I'm going to say something, and I want you to take it in the spirit it's given. Whatever that man has told you, whatever he's shown you, ask yourself one question. Why now? He sat on it for 8 years, and then the week the container lease came up, suddenly there's a conspiracy." "He sat on it," Claire said, "because his wife was dying and his insurance ran through his employment." The silence on the other end of that line was the longest one yet. "I didn't know that," Victor said. "You did," Claire said. "You were in the room when they walked him out." 14 months, Victor. She got 14 months, and he spent them on a legal pad doing math about whether he could afford to fight you. Claire. "Monday at 10, she said, and hung up, and then she went outside and threw up behind a stack of tires and did not tell anyone. At 9:15 that night, Ethan found her out there anyway. You all right?" "No." "Fair. I keep waiting to feel angry," Claire said. "I think I skipped it. I went straight to the part where you feel stupid." "You're not stupid. I sold you 6 engines for $4,000. "You sold me 6 engines for $4,000. Ethan agreed. "And if you hadn't, they'd have been shredded in a yard outside Memphis on Thursday, and I'd have watched it happen through a fence." Claire laughed one wet, ugly note. "That's a generous way to look at it." "It's the accurate way." He sat down on the bumper. "Ma'am, can I say something you're not gonna like?" "Everyone else has. Your daddy did a cowardly thing." Claire's head came up. "He believed a piece of paper over a man he loved, and then when he figured out he was wrong, he didn't fix it. He wrote 2 letters and put them in a drawer and paid a lease for 8 years and told himself that was the same as fixing it." Ethan looked at his hands. "It wasn't the same. It cost me my career, and it cost him his last 8 years of thinking well of himself, and both of those were his fault." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Monday morning somebody's going to stand up and defend Arthur Whitmore's memory," Ethan said, "and I need you to already know the worst of it so you can't be knocked over with it." Claire wiped her face with the back of her wrist. "And what do I say? You say he was a great man who did one cowardly thing and then spent 8 years quietly trying to leave the door open," Ethan said, "and that his daughter came and opened it. That's all true. Say true things, and it's very hard to lose." At 9:40 in the morning, Day 8 Anton Rice walked into the Hollis Brothers dyno cell in a linen jacket and a state of near disbelief with a certified operator and a notary and a man with a camera on a tripod, and by 11:20 they had run it 3 times. 9:40, 9:42, 9:41. At 11:35 Rice took his glasses off and cleaned them with a shirt tail, which Claire would later learn was the only nervous tic the man had. "Mr. Walker." "Sir." "I have been in this business 26 years. "Yes, sir." "I would like to offer you $5 million, Rice said. "For all 6 units, the calibration data, and a consulting arrangement of 36 months. The room went absolutely still. Delmar Hollis put down his coffee so carefully that it made no sound at all. Ray Dunlop, who had sold a truck on Friday, said, "Sweet Lord." Noah Walker said, "How much?" And Ethan Walker, 41 days past due. On a shop note, $4,000 poorer than he'd been on Monday standing in a rented dyno cell, in a shirt with a bolt in the pocket, said, "No." Claire's head snapped around. Rice did not move. "No. Not yet. Mr. Walker, I do not make that offer twice. Sir, I don't want you to make it twice. I want you to make it Monday afternoon." Ethan wiped his hands on the rag. "Right now, if I sell you those engines, a man in Nashville stands up on Monday morning and says the disgruntled ex-employee sold stolen intellectual property to a foreign racing team. And he'd have a point because I'd have done it. And Monday afternoon, Ethan said, either that man is finished or I am, and whichever way it goes, you'll be buying from somebody with clean hands." Reese studied him for a long moment. Your father was a stubborn man. My father hauled block for 30 years. Rice put his glasses back on. Monday afternoon. And Mr. Walker, if it goes badly for you Monday, my offer stands anyway. I have been buying engines for 26 years, and I have never once bought one from a man I liked. I would enjoy it. At 100 that afternoon, Dale Prentice called and said the payoff quote had been requested a second time, and this time the requester had asked whether the bank would accept a wire on Saturday. Saturday's today, Ethan said. Yes, it is. At 3:10, Delmar Hollis walked out to the lot and came back in and said, There's a fella in a car at the end of my road. At 3:12, Ethan told Ray to put number 6 back on the flatbed. Where are we taking it? Not home. Ethan. Delmar. Ethan said, You still got that trailer your brother-in-law leaves in the back field. With the horses in it. Is there a horse in it right now? There is not. At 4:40, the most valuable internal combustion engine in the state of Tennessee spent the weekend chained inside a horse trailer in a field behind a body shop in Cheatham County under a tarp with a 61-year-old man sleeping in a folding chair next to it and a shotgun he never once touched. At 6 o'clock Sunday morning, Priya and Claire and Ethan sat at a kitchen table with Reyes on speakerphone and built the thing that would go in front of 9 people. At 6:40, Reyes said, There's a problem with the metadata argument. Explain. The archive file shows modified March 11th at 11:40. But a good lawyer says a file modification could be a formatting change, a resave anything. It shows somebody touched it. It doesn't show what they typed. Claire put her head in her hands. So we've got nothing? We've got the cartridge, Ethan said. You said the cartridge is calibration tables. The cartridge is everything Cell 4 wrote, Ethan said, including the run log, including a time-stamped entry every 90 seconds of every hour that engine ran written to media that has never touched a network and has been in a steel box bolted to the underside of a desk since 2018. Priya's head came up slowly. Ethan, she said. The run log has the horsepower figures in it. It has every one of them. Written the same night. Written the same second, Ethan said. Reyes on the phone said, Oh my God. At 7:20, Priya pulled the January run log and put it on the screen, and there it was in a format nobody had used since 2014 from a machine with no clock. Anybody had ever set but the factory. Peak corrected 906.4. Claire Whitmore looked at it and started to cry, and she was so tired of crying that she laughed while she did it. At 8 o'clock Monday morning, day 9, Ethan Walker put on the only jacket he owned that fit, and Noah stood in the kitchen doorway in his pajamas. Dad? Yeah? If it goes bad. Then it goes bad, and we're right where we were on Monday, and we were fine on Monday. We weren't fine on Monday. We were together on Monday, Ethan said, which is the same word in this house. Noah nodded, and then he ran at him and hit him hard enough around the middle to knock the wind out of him, and Ethan stood there in the kitchen holding on to his kid with both arms. At 9:52, they walked into the Whitmore Motors boardroom, and Victor Hale stood up when he saw Ethan and did not sit back down for 4 seconds. Claire, he said, this is a closed session. He's an invited presenter. On whose authority? Mine. You don't have the authority. Then remove me, Claire said after. At 10:04, Victor Hale went first because he had the agenda and he was good, and for 11 minutes, Claire watched 9 people believe him. He was sad about it. He was sad about Arthur. He was sad about a talented young man who had lost his way under pressure. He put up the March 11th report with 961 on it, and Ethan Walker's signature at the bottom, and he said gently that the company had protected that signature for 8 years, and that it was a shame, and that he'd hoped never to have to say it out loud. At 10:15 he sat down. At 10:16, Ethan Walker stood up and said, That's my signature and that's not my report, and I can prove it in about 90 seconds, so I'd like to use the other 8 minutes on something else. At 10:17, he put the cell 4-run log on the screen. At 10:19, the outside director from Cincinnati said, "What am I looking at?" "You're looking at what the machine wrote by itself at 9:14 at night on January 19, 2018, Ethan said. 9:06.4. It's been in a steel box under a desk in a building your company's scheduled for demolition today." Somebody at the far end of the table said, "Today?" 8 o'clock this morning, Reyes said from the back wall. "Contractors on site. It's in the work order." At 10:22, Victor Hale said, "This is theatrical." And it came out 1/2 step too fast. At 10:24, Claire Whitmore put up the cover page of a technical dossier presented in Belgium in 2021 by Boyd Technical Advisory LLC, and then the engagement letter Rice's counsel had released at 8 that morning, and then the signature page. Victor J. Hale. On behalf of the licensor. The room made a sound like a held breath letting go. At 10:25, Victor said, "That was an authorized exploration of legacy assets." "Authorized by who?" said the director from Cincinnati. "By the Office of the Chief Executive. Arthur was dead in 2021. By the delegation." "Whose delegation?" "Mine," Victor said, and heard it and stopped. At 10:31, the audit committee chair asked for the room. At 11:40, they came back. At 11:44, Victor Hale was placed on immediate administrative suspension, pending an independent investigation. His trustee authority over the estate shares was referred to. Probate counsel and 2 men from security walked him to the elevator with a cardboard box, and Denise Fowler, who had been sitting in the back row since 9:30. In her church clothes, watched him go past, and did not say one word, which was the loudest thing anybody did all day. At 12:10, the board asked Ethan Walker what he wanted. "There's a company overseas offering $5 million for the 6 units and the data," he said. I told him Monday afternoon. It's 12:10. And I'd rather you had them. At 12:30, they offered him 3. At 12:50, they offered him 4.5. At 1:15, after a phone call in the hallway, where Anton Rice said the words, "I will go to 6, and I will enjoy that too," Claire Whitmore came back into the room and told 9 people that Whitmore Motors was going to buy back its own future for $6,200,000, and that if anybody wanted to vote against it, they could explain to a shareholder someday why they let a 940 horsepower American V8 leave the country over $1 million. Nobody wanted to explain that. At 1:41, they wrote the check. At 1:44, Ethan Walker held $6,200,000 in his hand, in a room where he had been called a liar 8 years earlier, and what he said was, "I've got one condition, and it isn't money." "Name it." "You're going to write a policy," he said. "Any engineer at this company whose name is on a program can't have that program taken off them without a hearing they're allowed to attend. Not a memo. A hearing with their own witnesses, and it goes in the minutes." The director from Cincinnati said, "That's it. That's it. You're not going to ask for your job back." "No, sir." "Why not?" And Ethan Walker looked at Claire Whitmore, who was standing at the end of a table she had inherited and had finally, at 36 years old, earned. "Because I've got a garage," he said, "and a boy who gets off a bus at 3:20. At 3:19 that afternoon, he was standing at the end of his own driveway when the bus came around the bend. Noah got off with his backpack on one shoulder and stopped when he saw his father's face. Well, Ethan crouched down and took the jar of quarters out from behind his back and put it in his son's hands. "Buy the telescope," he said. Noah looked at the jar in his hands and then at his father's face, and he did not celebrate, because 10-year-olds read faces before they read words. "Dad, why do you look like that?" "Like what?" "Like when you told me about Mom." Ethan sat down right there on the edge of the gravel with his knees up. "It went our way, bud." "Then why?" "Because I've been carrying something for 8 years, Ethan said. "And I set it down about an hour ago, and now my arms don't know what to do." Noah sat down beside him, and neither of them said anything for a while. Then Noah said, "Can I ask how much?" "You can ask. How much?" $6,200,000. Noah put the jar down very carefully in the gravel, like it had gotten dangerous. Dad? Yeah. That's more than the telescope. At 3:40, Ray Dunlop pulled into the lot in the Buick with no air conditioning and got out and said, "Well?" And Ethan told him, and Ray leaned against the fender and did not speak for about 15 seconds. Say the number again. 6.2. For 6 engines. For 6 engines the data, and 36 months where I have to answer the phone. Ray took off his cap and put it back on. I sold my truck for $4,200, he said. You did. I sold a 19-year-old truck to a man in Fairview on a Friday morning. Ray. I want to say something before you say what you're about to say. Ray pointed a finger at him. I did not do that as an investment. If you try to hand me a check, I will put it in the stove. You'll take it. I will not. Then I'll buy the truck back from the fella in Fairview, Ethan said, and I'll park it in your driveway, and if you push it in a lake, that's between you and the lake. Ray's jaw worked. That's low, he said. It's Tennessee. At 4:15, Dale Prentice called, and his voice had a strange flatness to it. Ethan, your note got paid this afternoon. I know. I wired it at 2:30 from a conference room. No, Dale said. No, son, listen to me. It got paid at 11:50 this morning. Ethan stood up out of the chair. Say that again. Full payoff wire, 11:50 a.m. And then your wire came in at 2:38, and I've got a duplicate sitting in a suspense account and a compliance officer asking me what in the world is going on out here. Who paid it, Dale? The holder released it, the LLC out of Delaware. They paid off their own note and released the lien and requested the file be closed. That doesn't make any sense. It makes one kind of sense, Dale said carefully. It makes sense if somebody was about to be looked at real hard by people with badges, and somebody's lawyer told him the very worst thing sitting on his books this morning was a single father's mortgage he bought at face value on a Wednesday. At 4:22, Ethan Walker realized that Victor Hale, at 11:50 on that Monday morning, while sitting in a boardroom watching himself end, had already known how it was going to go. At 6 o'clock that evening, the story broke on a trade site, and by 8 o'clock, it was on 2 local stations, and by 10 o'clock, a woman from a national business desk had called the shop phone 4 times. Noah answered the 4th one. Walker Automotive. Hi there, is your dad available? He's under a truck. Could you tell him it's about the Whitmore engine story? He said to tell everybody he's not doing interviews until Thursday. Can I ask who I'm speaking with? Noah Walker. Noah, can I ask you the question? What's it like having a dad who, ma'am, Noah said, he's under a truck, and hung up, and Ethan, who was in fact under a truck, laughed until he had to roll out from under it. At 7:30 the next morning, 2 federal agents came up the county road in a car so plain it was practically a costume. They were polite. They sat at the kitchen table and drank coffee out of mugs with a bank's name on them, and they asked questions for 4 hours. Mr. Walker, when did you first become aware that Program 4400 technology had been offered for license outside the company? Friday. This past Friday. Yes, sir. Not before. Sir, before Friday, I thought I'd been fired by a proud old man who believed a bad piece of paper. That's the whole thing I thought for 8 years. The younger agent looked up. You never suspected. Suspected what I was a man with a sick wife in a rented house in Michigan. I didn't suspect anything. I made appointments and I filled prescriptions. At 11:40, the older agent set down his pen. Mr. Walker, I want to be straight with you about something. This is not going to be quick. This is a document case across a border. This could be 2 years before anybody sees the inside of a courtroom. I figured. Some people find that hard, sir. Ethan said, I waited 8 years to get the truth. I can wait 2 more to get the rest of it. I'm not in a hurry anymore. That's the whole point of what happened yesterday. At 100 that afternoon, Claire Whitmore called, and she sounded like she'd slept about 90 minutes. They subpoenaed 11 years of email. Good. Ethan, they subpoenaed my father's email. Also good. Is it, ma'am? He shifted the phone. You already know the worst thing about him. Anything they find now is either the same or better. At 3 o'clock on Wednesday, the board reinstated Denise Fowler with back pay her 31 years intact and offered her a title she didn't want. Director of Corporate Records, Claire said. No. Denise, I've got 22 months to my pension and I'd like to spend them being exactly as important as I was on Monday, thank you. Denise straightened a stack of paper that didn't need straightening. But I'll take one thing. Anything. The archive gets a lock that only 2 people have a key to, and neither of them works in finance. At 3:40, Marcus Ellis came off administrative leave and walked into Claire's office and said, "Ma'am, I'd like to formally state that I never wanted to be in that room." Noted. And I'd like to be in every room from now on. At 4:20, Claire Whitmore sat down with the outside director from Cincinnati, a 70-year-old man named Walter Ambrose, who had been on her father's board for 19 years and had never once returned her calls the same day. You wanted to see me. I did. Sit down. Ambrose folded his hands. Claire, I've been a director at 6 companies. I've watched maybe 40 chief executives, and I want to tell you something you're not going to like. That seems to be the week for it. 2 weeks ago, I would have voted you out. He said it flatly. I had my hand up. Victor had me and Nadine both, and we'd have done it Monday, and we'd have called it a leadership transition, and I'd have gone home and slept fine. Claire made herself not blink. And now I've watched a 36-year-old woman walk into a room where every advantage was on the other side of the table, Ambrose said, and put her own father's mistake on a screen in front of 9 people because it was true. Do you know how rare that is? I didn't do it to be rare. That's why it's rare. He stood up. You've got my proxy for 3 years. Don't make me regret it, and don't get sentimental about the ones who stayed quiet, because half this board watched Victor Hale run this place for 2 years and said nothing, and you're going to have to work with them anyway. That's the job. At 5:15 that afternoon, a car came up Ethan Walker's driveway and parked politely, and Ray said, "Ethan," in a voice that made Ethan come out fast. Dennis Boyd got out with his hands already up in a placating gesture. "Mr. Walker, I'd like 2 minutes. You've got about 11 seconds. I want you to know I'm cooperating. Full immunity conversation, my attorney's all ready." "Noah," Ethan said, "go inside." "Dad." "Inside." The screen door closed. "You took a bill of sale out of my drawer," Ethan said, while my 10-year-old stood in the kitchen believing you needed the bathroom, and a deputy came out the next morning, and I could not prove I owned my own life. "I was paid to. I know what you were paid to do. I've read the engagement letter." Ethan came down off the step. "Here's what I want to say to you, and then you're going to leave. My boy blamed himself for 4 days. 4 days he wouldn't eat right. He'd start a sentence and stop. That's what you actually did, Mr. Boyd. The engines were always going to be fine. Engines don't care. You put a hole in a 10-year-old. Boyd stood there with nothing in his hands. "For what it's worth," he said, "I told Hale in 2021 that the dossier wouldn't hold. I told him nobody licenses architecture without hardware. He said the hardware was in a container on a nobody's lot in Tennessee and would be shredded inside of 5 years. Ethan went very still. He knew where they were. He always knew where they were, Boyd said. He just couldn't touch them because the lease was in Arthur's own hand, and touching it would have made a record. He waited for the old man to die, and then he waited 2 more years for an audit to do it for him. At 5:24, Ethan Walker learned that the only reason his life's work still existed was that a dead man had made it impossible to destroy without leaving fingerprints. "Get off my property," he said, and Boyd went. At 8 o'clock that night, Ethan sat on the tailgate with a beer he didn't drink, and Ray came and sat beside him, and after about 10 minutes, Ray said, "There's a thing I gotta tell you. and I've been sick over it since Monday." "That's a hell of an opener." "Ethan." Ray turned his cap around in his hands. "In the fall of 2019, I come in early to open up, and there was a car at the end of the drive. Black car, nice, sitting there with the motor running." Ethan set the bottle down. "Ray. He sat there about 40 minutes. I could see a man in it. Old fella, white hair, hands on the wheel." "Ray? And then he pulled out and drove off. And about a week later, I seen a picture in a magazine at Marla's doctor's office of the Whitmore Motors fella, and I knew it was him." Ray's voice went to pieces in the middle. "And I never told you. 19 years, and that's the only thing I ever kept from you." Ethan sat there for a long time. "Why?" he said finally. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you'd just lost her," Ray said. "It was 6 months. 6 months after the funeral, and you were getting up every day and putting that boy on a bus, and I watched you do it, and I thought if I tell him a rich old man sat at the end of his driveway for 40 minutes and then drove away without knocking, it'll break something in him I can't fix." Ethan put his face in his hands. "So I ate it," Ray said. "And I have chewed on it every day for 7 years, and Monday, when that girl put her daddy's letter in your hand, I thought I was going to be sick in the parking lot." "He came," Ethan said muffled. "He came. He came, and he couldn't do it." "He couldn't do it," Ray agreed. "Same as you couldn't tell her who you were. You two are the same kind of stubborn, and it cost you both 8 years, and I helped, and I'm sorry." At 8:31, Ethan Walker put his hand on the back of Ray Dunlop's neck, the way you do with a brother, and said, "There's nothing to forgive," and meant it, and that was the end of the only secret between them. At 6 o'clock the next morning, he called Claire. "He came out here." "What?" "Your father, fall of 2019. He sat at the end of my driveway for 40 minutes and turned around." There was no sound at all on the line for 8 or 9 seconds. "How do you know?" "Ray saw him." "Ray saw him and didn't say anything for 7 years." "Ray was protecting me," Ethan said. "Your father was protecting himself. Everybody in this story spent 8 years protecting somebody from a piece of information, and look what it got us." Claire's voice came back very small. "What do I do with that?" "Nothing. You don't do anything with it. You just know it." Ethan looked out at the container under the oak. He got in a car and drove 90 miles to say a thing he couldn't say. That's not nothing, ma'am. Cowardice that drives 90 miles is at least halfway to something else. At 9:30 that morning, Claire Whitmore went to her father's grave for the first time since the funeral and stood there for 40 minutes, which she did not tell anyone about and which she thought about for the rest of her life. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, the lawyers wanted to talk about the money. "Mr. Walker, the 6.2 is structured with $2 million at closing and the balance over the consulting term. We'd recommend. How fast can I get 160,000 of it? Today if you want." "I want." At 4 o'clock, he paid off a note that was already paid, refused the refund twice, and finally let Dale Prentice put it into a certificate of deposit in Noah Walker's name that the boy would not be able to touch until he was 18. At 4:20, he wrote a check to a fabricator in Ohio for $200,000, and Tom Buell called him in tears at 6:40 and said he was mailing it back. "Tom? I don't want it, Ethan. Tom, do you remember what you did for us in 2017 when the intake casting came in wrong? I remachined 40 of them on my own time." "On your own time, in December." Ethan let that sit. "This is December, Tom. It just got here late." At 7 o'clock, he called Priya Raghunathan and told her the number, and she said, "Ethan, that's too much. Priya, you sat at my kitchen table for 6.5 hours and typed while a man talked out of his own head. And at the end of it, there was 9:45 on a screen. 9:41. 9:41 on Saturday. 9:45 yesterday, when Gus ran it again with the cell at 82, Ethan said. "You were right. I was conservative." There was a pause. "I was right. You were right. Say it slower." At 7:15, he called Gus Whitfield in Kentucky, who had flown to Tennessee at his own expense at the age of 67, and offered him a number, and Gus said, "Son, I don't want money. I want to be in the cell when you run all 6. Then you're in the cell. That's the fee. That's the fee." At 8 o'clock that night, Claire called with a proposition, and Ethan said no before she finished the sentence. "You didn't hear the whole thing." "I heard the word chief. Chief Technical Officer of Whitmore Motors." "No, ma'am." "Ethan. Claire." It was the first time he'd used her name, and it stopped her cold. "I've got a boy who gets off a bus at 3:20. I said that in a boardroom, and everybody thought it was a nice line. It wasn't a line, it's my whole schedule." "Then what do you want?" "I want to consult 36 months, like the paper says, out of my own shop on my own hours, and I want to come up there when it matters and go home when it doesn't." "That's not enough." "It's exactly enough." "Then let me ask for something else," Claire said. "Something that doesn't cost you a single hour." At 8:04 she told him, and he was quiet for a long time. "Say the name again." "The Walker Rule," Claire said. "That's what Ambrose is calling it in the minutes. He started calling it that on his own. I didn't ask him to." "That's not what I meant when I asked for the policy." "I know. That's why it stuck." At 10 o'clock the next Monday, 1 week after the boardroom, Whitmore Motors announced that it was reopening the performance division, that it had recovered a discontinued engine architecture, and that the program's original chief engineer had been retained as technical consultant. The stock did what stocks do, which is behave badly for 11 days, and then behave sensibly. At 3:20 that afternoon, Ethan Walker was at the end of his driveway when the bus came. He was there the next day, and the next, and for a solid year of days, and that was the actual settlement he had negotiated for. At 9 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday 5 weeks later, the federal indictment came down on 11 counts, and the number that made the news was not the 11. It was the other one because the investigators found that Boyd Technical Advisory had received $4,100,000 across 2 years for material Victor Hale did not own. At 9:40, Claire read the summary and found the line that put her on the floor of her office. The first payment had cleared on April the 2nd of 2018, 3 weeks after her father shut the program down. "He didn't bury it because he believed it failed," she said out loud to nobody. "He buried it because he already had a buyer." At 11 o'clock that morning, she called Ethan and told him, and Ethan said the thing that ended the last argument he'd been having with himself since he was 30. "Then your father never doubted me," he said. "Not really. He got handed a forgery on his worst day by the one man in that building he trusted with money, and 40 minutes later, he made a decision he spent the rest of his life trying to walk back." "You're being generous to him again." "I'm not being generous, ma'am. I'm being accurate." Ethan's voice was rough. "You want to know the truth? I'd rather it be this. 8 years I thought a man I loved looked at me and decided I was a liar. Turns out he was robbed the same day I was. That's not a worse story. That's a better one, and I'm going to take it." At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Denise Fowler found one more thing, which everybody had stopped expecting. She called Claire from the archive and said only, "Come down here." At 2:20, Claire looked at a requisition form dated the 9th of November, 2019. Fall of 2019. A fuel card charge company vehicle 91 miles out and 91 miles back, and a handwritten note in the memo field in her father's hand. Personal. Reimburse from my account. "He didn't want it on the company," Denise said. "He drove out there and he sat at the end of the man's driveway." "Yes, ma'am. And then he came back and he paid for his own gas so nobody would ask." At 2:24, Claire Whitmore sat down on an archive stool and said, "God, we're all so bad at this." And Denise Fowler put a hand on her shoulder, which in 31 years she had never done to an executive. At 6 o'clock on a Saturday in October, 4 months on all 6 engines ran for the first time in the same building on the same day, with Gus Whitfield in the cell, and Tom Buell up from Ohio, and Priya on the laptop, and Ray Dunlop leaning on a rail with his arms crossed, and Delmar Hollis, who had been invited and had driven 3 hours and told everybody twice that he was the man who ran the first one. Number 4 made 952. Priya said, "That can't be right," and ran it again, and it made 952 again. "That's the one you were building when they walked you out?" she said. "That's the one." "Ethan, that's the best one." "Yeah," he said. That's usually how it goes. At 7:30 that night, Noah Walker, 11 years old, now stood in a dino cell, wearing ear protection 2 sizes too big, and asked the room a question in the gap between runs. "Can I ask something dumb?" Gus said, "Only kind worth asking." "Why didn't anybody at the company ever come look at them?" Noah pointed. "They were in a box in our yard for 8 years. Anybody could have just opened the door." Nobody answered right away. Then Ray said, "Because they were told they were junk, son. And when a fella with a nice suit tells you a thing's junk, most people believe him and stop looking. That's the whole story you've been living in." At 10 o'clock in the morning, 11 months and 9 days after a woman in a coat shoved 400 pounds of iron off a workbench. Whitmore Motors held a product launch in a building outside Nashville with 400 people in it. At 10:04, Claire Whitmore stood at a podium and did not use the speech that had been written for her. "2 years ago, I inherited this company," she said, "and I spent most of that time being managed by people who told me my father was sentimental and that his best ideas were his most expensive mistakes. 11 months ago, I drove out to a garage in Cheatham County to get rid of 6 engines I had been told were failures. I was rude to the man who owned that garage. I was rude in front of his son. And then I put my hand on one of those engines and I pushed it onto the floor. The room went absolutely silent, which is not a thing that happens at product launches. That man's name is Ethan Walker. He designed every one of them. He designed them here for my father, and he was removed from this company in 2018 on a document that we now know was altered by our own chief financial officer 3 weeks before that man sold the technology out the back door for $4 million. Somebody in the third row said, "Jesus, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you a redemption story about a corporation," Claire said. "Corporations don't get redeemed. People do. So here's what we've actually done. We've adopted a governance rule that says no engineer at this company can be separated from a program bearing their name. Without a hearing, they are entitled to attend with witnesses of their choosing entered into the minutes. Our board calls it the Walker Rule. It was the only thing Mr. Walker asked us for, and he asked for it in a room where he could have asked for anything." At 10:11, she said the last part. "This engine goes into production in the spring. My father put its name in front of this board in February of 2018 and was voted down. He intended to bring it back in April. He never got to." She looked out at the room. "Last month our board voted on it again, 9-0. At 10:12 the cover came off and the room made a sound, and the name on the plenum in raised letters said, Walker 8. At 10:14, Ethan Walker, standing off to the side in a jacket that fit, put his hand over his mouth and kept it there. At 10:16, 400 people stood up. Noah Walker, 11 years old in the front row with a jar of quarters at home on a shelf that his father had never spent a dime of, watched the whole room get on its feet and then turned around and looked up. "Dad?" "Yeah, bud." "Do you remember when she called them junk?" Ethan Walker looked at his son and then at the machine with his own name on it, and then at a woman at a podium who had driven 90 miles to a garage to be a different person than the one who'd arrived. "I remember," he said. "But that's the part I'd keep, son. Because a man's worth isn't decided by the people who look at him and see junk. It's decided the day he refuses to believe them." He put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "They laughed at 6 engines in a shipping container," Ethan said. "Every one of them runs, and so do we.